Henry Kissinger once remarked that while it may be dangerous to be America's enemy, being its ally can prove fatal. This cold observation of U.S. foreign policy resonates deeply with Ukraine's current situation. Recent developments, particularly Donald Trump's sudden shift in stance on Ukraine, have raised significant concerns across Europe and even within the United States. Once a staunch advocate of sending military aid to Kyiv, Trump now appears determined to broker a peace deal with Moscow. Such a deal, however, would heavily favor Russia, potentially leaving Ukraine abandoned in its most vulnerable hour. Reports from behind closed doors suggest that Trump's team has offered Russia substantial concessions. These allegedly include granting Russia control over parts of Ukrainian territory, easing sanctions, reducing the U.S. military presence in Eastern Europe, and preventing Ukraine from ever joining NATO. Meanwhile, Russia has shown little willingness to reciprocate, offering minimal concessions of its own. The drastic nature of these negotiations begs the question: why is Trump so eager to concede so much? What does he see in an agreement with Russian President Vladimir Putin that warrants sidelining Ukraine, a country that once enjoyed strong bipartisan support in the U.S.? Is this a well-thought-out strategic realignment or simply reckless deal-making? To grasp the rationale behind Trump's foreign policy pivot, it is essential to look at the broader geopolitical landscape. Trump has articulated his approach in the past, particularly in an interview from October 2024, where he remarked, "The one thing you never want to happen is for Russia and China to unite. I'm going to have to divide them, and I believe I can do it." The prolonged war in Ukraine, lasting longer than many anticipated, has strained U.S. resources and attention. Trump and his advisors argue that Washington should shift its priorities, focusing on containing China rather than being embroiled in ongoing conflicts in Eastern Europe. In many respects, Trump's Russia policy echoes an old Cold War-era strategy famously implemented by Kissinger. The logic of this strategy is straightforward. If two adversaries grow too close, pull one away to weaken the other. Kissinger successfully applied this approach in the 1970s by improving U.S. relations with China to isolate the Soviet Union. Trump now seeks to reverse this formula, attempting to align with Russia to counterbalance China. Seen through this lens, Ukraine becomes a mere pawn on the geopolitical chessboard, potentially sacrificed for the perceived greater good of isolating China. However, geopolitics rarely offers simple solutions. Both Russia and China are well aware of Trump's strategy, and Beijing is already working to solidify its partnership with Moscow. China has increased trade with Russia, conducted joint military drills, and promoted stronger diplomatic ties. Economically, the relationship between Russia and China has never been stronger. Trade between the two nations has reached record highs, with China importing significant amounts of Russian oil and natural gas while providing Moscow with crucial economic support amid Western sanctions. This mutual reliance has transformed the Russia-China partnership into a robust and strategic alliance. Trump's approach misreads the conditions that allowed Kissinger's strategy to work decades ago. In the early 1970s, China and the Soviet Union were bitter rivals, and both nations saw an alignment with the United States as advantageous. Today, the dynamics are entirely different. While Russia and China are not ideologically aligned, their mutual opposition to U.S. influence has created a solid partnership rooted in shared strategic interests. The modern Russia-China alliance is driven by economic interdependence and geopolitical necessity. Following the 2014 annexation of Crimea and subsequent Western sanctions, Russia pivoted heavily toward China, deepening trade and military cooperation. Today, China is Russia's largest trading partner, supplying crucial technology and financial resources while importing vast amounts of Russian energy. This partnership is unlikely to be undone by Trump's overtures, as Moscow sees its alliance with Beijing as indispensable for maintaining its geopolitical relevance. Even if Trump offers Russia significant concessions, it is doubtful that Moscow would pivot away from Beijing. For one, China provides a stable, long-term partnership, while any agreement with Trump would be inherently fragile. Putin, who plans to remain in power well beyond 2029, knows that Trump's term will end, and a new U.S. administration could easily reverse any deal. Moreover, the trust deficit between Washington and Moscow runs deep, particularly in the wake of the Ukraine war and heightened tensions in Europe. Trump's potential concessions to Russia are not trivial. Reports suggest that his administration may consider withdrawing U.S. troops from NATO countries in Eastern Europe, including Poland, the Baltics, and Romania. This would represent a significant scaling back of NATO's eastern presence, a long-standing Russian demand. Additionally, Trump is reportedly scaling back U.S. democracy promotion efforts through agencies like USAID, a move designed to appease Russia's grievances about U.S. interference in its internal affairs. These concessions, coupled with Trump's willingness to pressure Ukraine into ceding territory, reflect his broader vision of redesigning the global order. His aim is to realign U.S. foreign policy to accommodate Russian interests, hoping that this would incentivize Moscow to distance itself from Beijing. However, this gamble is fraught with risks. First, there is no guarantee that Russia would reciprocate Trump's overtures. While Putin would undoubtedly welcome U.S. concessions, he is unlikely to sacrifice his partnership with China, which has proven far more reliable and beneficial. Second, such a policy shift would alienate NATO allies, many of whom view Russia as an existential threat. Any perception of U.S. betrayal could weaken the alliance, undermining transatlantic unity at a critical time. Finally, Trump's actions risk damaging America's reputation on the global stage. By abandoning Ukraine and making significant concessions to Russia, the U.S. would signal to its allies and adversaries alike that its commitments are negotiable. This erosion of trust would take years, if not decades, to repair. In conclusion, Trump's attempt to broker a deal with Putin is both short-sighted and unlikely to succeed. His strategy, rooted in Cold War-era thinking, fails to account for the complexities of today's global dynamics. Russia and China's partnership is too strong and strategically important to be undermined by temporary U.S. overtures. Meanwhile, the cost of Trump's concessions, to Ukraine, NATO, and America's global standing, could be immense, leaving the U.S. weaker and more isolated in the long run. Geopolitics, like chess, requires careful planning and foresight. Sacrificing key allies for uncertain gains risks not only losing the game but also undermining the very principles that have long underpinned U.S. foreign